And Janet's question is one is familiar, but always, we just never want to assume people have heard or your responses, but I've always liked this one. How do lawyers decide how much your case should be worth? Good question.
Well, there's many, I guess, many facts go into trying to make a determination of how much a case is worth. And generally, you have to take into account the type of injury that you received, the amount of medicals that you have gotten, and your future medicals, whether or not there's going to be any permanent injuries. And believe it or not, you also have to factor into jurisdiction that the accident or the injury occurred in, and where you're able to file the lawsuit, because different jurisdictions have different juries, and different juries award different dollar amounts. And if you're in a jurisdiction that has historically been fair and reasonable in their verdicts, then you will end up getting more money in those counties than you would in those counties where you have very conservative juries who do not, in my opinion, give fair amounts of dollar amounts. So, and then at the end of the day, the ultimate decider of I guess the value of your case, if it's tried before a jury, is a jury. So sometimes it's out of the lawyer's hands. A good trial lawyer will be able to give you some recommendations and give you some guidance on what he believes the case is worth based upon his experience. But at the end of the day, whether or not to settle that claim is going to be the client's decision. Rocky.
Yeah, I agree with everything you said. I would say liability, what you really have to do, whether you're making a claim or going all the way to the jury, is you got to show that somebody did something wrong, that they were negligent, caused the wreck, and that somebody was hurt. And so talking about the liability part, the jury can actually apportion fault. And so if it's, who ran the red light, or somebody maybe was speeding, but then someone ran a stop sign and hit them, the jury could say 90% on the defendant who was running the red light, but maybe 10% on you, and that would reduce your award. So liability can play a factor in the value of your claim. Another factor is the plaintiff themselves. What kind of plaintiff do they make? And I start that evaluation the first time they come in my office, and I start to envision, in a year from now, if we're in front of a jury in Hinds County, what are they going to think of this person? Are they going to think they're honest? Are they going to think that they're exaggerating? Are they whining? Or better yet, are they understating their injuries? Because if you're really, really hurt, and I mean catastrophically, where you have permanent injuries, a limp, you're going to need medical care for life, most of the time your damages take care of themselves. It's people that aren't that hurt, that maybe are grunting and groaning with just strains and sprains and saying, I can't do anything. That's where you get into a plaintiff that's going to get in trouble, because, juries don't like, my dad used to say, one line does 100 truths. And he doesn't, you don't ever want a plaintiff that's having to sell themselves on their damages. You want the damages, if you go to trial, to be significant enough that the jury gets it. The last thing is the attorney reputation. And I think you touched on this a little bit, Tim. One of the factors that the insurance company is going to do when they're evaluating before they roll the dice and go to trial, because there's risk involved on both sides, is the attorney's reputation. Will he go to trial? Can he win at trial? And what are his past results? And that's going to also play a factor. And it's why some attorneys maybe get $50,000 on a case before trial, and some get offered $75,000 or $100,000 or even $500,000 on the same case, because the insurance company doesn't tell you what they're paying from case to case. They keep that secret. But Tim and I have done this long enough to know what the values of cases are and know the difference between, a minor case and a bigger case.
Rocky, one of the most interesting things that you said was about the fact of whether or not you have a likable plaintiff. Obviously we as lawyers don't choose our plaintiffs, but we certainly try to represent them the best we can. But what I've tried to tell plaintiffs in the past is, if I don't like you, a jury's not going to like you either. And at some point you have to have honest conversations with your client about their likability or their presentation before a jury when you're making decisions on how much that claim may be worth to that individual. Because sometimes a claim is individualistic to some extent of how much your claim is worth versus maybe somebody else's claim is worth. And some of it has to do with how the plaintiff presents themselves.
The likability factor that you bring up, often you see it so much play out in murder trials. So, I was glad you brought that up, because I guess it would, make a difference, if I'm going to speak on my injuries in front of a jury. So thank you for bringing that up. That's something I wouldn't have thought about when you think of personal injury. But
and many times And many times cases are settled based upon the fact that you do not want to present a particular client in front of a jury because you know what the outcome may be.
So would it look bad? I mean, so would it look bad if I'm in a personal injury case? I mean, because I know we kind of, again, in murder trials, it kind of plays out, if that person, maybe they're guilty or whatever, and so they don't want to see that person stand. But we're talking about being injured. You should be able to say that, but would it look bad if I just decided not to, or you, as my attorney, advised me not to speak?
Well, I mean, you probably would never get to that point. I mean, I'm not saying,
Okay.
look, fortunately for us, 99.9% of the folks that we represent, we like them and move forward with it. My only point was sometimes you run into certain clients that are not very likable. And when they're not very likable, and some of it may just mean that they may think their case is worth more than it is. But if they're not likable in front of a jury, they're going to generally get zeroed.